Let's start off from the beginning. Today, a number of actions involving the budget. There's been some questions, some criticism, some concerns, certainly. Um, Explain a little bit about the action, the lapses that occurred today, and what that will mean ultimately to the various departments and agencies involved.
Basically, today we're just fulfilling what was enacted early this year when the budget passed back at the end of June. And in fact, many of the lapses are very similar to what were done not only through this budget, but were done under Governor Doyle lapses in the past. And so they applied to all state agencies. They were no surprises out there. People were forewarned about that when the budget itself passed. We did, however, leading up to this, exempt a few areas that we thought were critically important. K through 12 public education, we felt like the change that were made early this year, that schools were able to account for those, but they couldn't account for more on top of that. Technical schools, for example, we thought were critically important with what we've heard from small businesses, and that is they don't have enough skilled workers to fill the job openings they have. So we thought that was critical to the economy. And then some select areas like funding the Department of Justice has for organizations that assist victims of sexual assault and child abuse and things of that nature. All of those were exempted from any of the lapses. The rest of the state agencies it applied to, including the UW system. And it's one where, in their case, we didn't exempt them because they're a large agency. They were given a number of flexibilities in the budget to be able to account for this and other changes. And we felt they were in pretty good shape.
Minority Leader Peter Barkett today had sent out a press release basically criticizing that move in particular with the University of Wisconsin system, leaving a number of programs subject to deep funding cuts, particularly, as he pointed out, the workforce development side of things in the university system. How do you respond to those criticisms?
Well, he's kind of grasping at straws. I mean, the reality is workforce development these days, if you listen to job creators, it's focused in the technical schools. That's where the skilled trades, that's where the needs are. That's why we exempted it.
Let's shift the conversation to the topic of conversation that has really dominated Wisconsin politics for the better part of the last year, and that is recall campaigns. You are the subject of a very aggressive recall campaign. Let me ask you this, and I want to get your take on this, because I don't think people fully understand what it is like to be, in one part, revered and respected, and some would say a hero in fiscal, in changing the dynamic of the budget. On the other side, you are, to a number of people, enemy number one. You are the most hated man in Wisconsin. What does that feel like?
Well, for 8 years when I was a county executive, I challenged the status quo there too. I mean, they had an economic crisis as well when I came in, and I was elected to provide leadership to take that on. A lot of people thought that would be short-lived, particularly since I was a Republican in an overwhelmingly Democrat county. And yet I was elected twice thereafter, because I think in times of crisis people want leadership. And I think there's some of the same going on here. And some of it, I think some of the angst in that you just talked about, certainly a fair amount of it's real and that people have that based on their beliefs. I think some of it's driven up by the ads and the attacks, particularly from unions both in the state and much of the funding that comes from unions from outside of the state, who are upset with more than just collective bargaining. They really just don't like the fact that we gave every public employee the right to choose on their own whether or not they are part of a union and no longer have their union dues automatically deducted. And that, for them, is really what this is about. It's why they've poured so much money in early in the year. They poured tens of millions of dollars into the state Senate recall elections, and will probably pour even more tens of millions of dollars in against my race. My hope is, though, for people that maybe at least have somewhat of an open mind, is that the best question I would ask them to consider is, if not this, what would the option be? It's not a yes or no proposition. Nearly every state across America had a budget deficit. And nearly every governor, Republican and Democrat alike, had to face what I had to face. You look at other states, what did they do? They either raised taxes, which had a devastating impact on the economy. Some states laid off thousands of public employees. I didn't want anybody laid off, public or private. Some states cut core services like Medicaid, which would put problems on the backs of needy families and children and seniors. We actually added $1.2 billion to Medicaid. And yet other states took the fourth option and used accounting gimmicks. But in Wisconsin's case, that's been done for years here. It's precisely why we're in the part of the problem we have in the first place. So out of those four options, I said I didn't want to take those because none of those were good, particularly good for getting our state's economy going again. Instead, we picked a fifth option, structural long-term reforms both for the state and for local governments. And I think in the end, they're a much preferable option to the other choices that other states had to make.
There's a lot of meanness surrounding the politics and the partisanship of these campaigns, really from both sides. That we're seeing it out there. We're certainly seeing it on a day-to-day basis. Some report, some allegation about it. Do you lose any sleep at night from those who are very heated in their criticism and their comments about you?
I think back when I was in the Assembly years ago, after I was in for a term, I started being assigned new members that came in to help mentor. And one of the things hopefully one of the best pieces of advice I gave any of those new members was simply this: don't ever personalize your differences, because your opponent today may be your ally tomorrow. And I think for many years in this state, we've kind of operated under that principle. I mean, let's be clear, for all the talk about division, I think most of that focuses on the Capitol and some of it resonates elsewhere. But politically, I mean, we've been a state that's been very passionate and almost equally divided, whether it was in presidential races or other issues out there. So it's not like we took a state that was monolithic and completely divided it politically. This has been an issue out there. But in the past, people could be passionate, whether it was voting for Gore or Bush or Kerry or an issue here or there, but still could be respectful about that position. Whatever reason, that's changed somewhat this year, and hopefully that's temporary change. I think some of that's a reflection, again, when you have the outside influences coming in, kind of raising the stakes, initially all against me and with money against me, and over time, kind of across the spectrum, for and against. My hope is over time, whether it's next year early or it's after the recall itself, that we can get back to that point in the state where we are respectful, even if we have passionate differences. The other good side about it is, because I'm an optimist, I like to see the good in just about anything, and that is if you get outside of the Capitol itself, if you go around the state as I have done, what I see is that overwhelmingly, people are less focused on what happens in state government and more on their own families, their neighborhoods, and their communities. And I see example after example of people who just unselfishly look out for their neighbors, for people they've never even met. They're helpful, they're compassionate, and I think that's a common bond that many of us have across the state.
But this is a campaign that is targeting you, of course, yeah. But there are residual effects, of course, collateral damage, if you will. And let me ask you this: how is the campaign, the partisanship, the bitterness impacting your family?
Well, it's tough. Yeah, no, it's tough. And on the personal side, I, as much as I may not like it all, I asked for the job, so that comes with the territory. And my kids and my wife were supportive, but they didn't, not the name on the ballot. And yet, there have been a number of times thousands of people bust in front of my home in Wauwatosa, where my kids still live and where I split time and where my parents live all the time in their 70s. My kids have been a target of an effort on Facebook to go after them. I've had verbal attacks against my wife and my kids and others out there. So yeah, that's frustrating. There's no doubt about that, and I wish there was a way we could get past that. Now, having said that, the flip side of this, for a lot of times, for any time you get a negative attack, I had an example last month. I was out raking leaves in front of my house in Wauwatosa on a Sunday before a Packers game, and I'm out with one of the friends of my two sons. He was helping us out rake, and car goes by, and the guy honks, puts his hand out the window, and flips me off. And this guy, Gavin, the kid says to me, "Mr. Walker, how do you put up with that?" And I said, "Well, you want to be respectful," and said, "I don't always agree with them doing that, and that, they can do it at the Capitol, they can do it somewhere else, but your home's kind of nasty, but okay, whatever." I said, "But you stay positive, something positive will happen to you." We go back to raking, about a minute goes by, literally, and car honks again. I said, "Oh, here we go again." I turn and look, and there's not one but two cars. Both guys have their arms out the window. Both are going like this. And of course, Gavin, it was kind of funny, said to me, "Did you know that was going to happen?" So I kind of chuckled at that. But the reality was, the reason I tell you that is, not just in that, but whether I go to an event and I got a protester out in front, but then I come inside and, somebody gives me a note card with a prayer in it, or I go somewhere else and somebody, and it's not even necessarily people who all agree with me on everything, but just people saying, hey, how's your family doing? We're thinking of you. What I've found is, by and large, people across the state are very affirming, that for every time somebody goes over the edge, and let me be clear, I don't believe that everybody who supports a recall or opposes me is out there doing those radical things either. I think that's a limited extreme as well. But there's plenty of other people that more than offset that. So I've still seen the good in all this, and even as much pressure as there is, I've still seen plenty of people who are very positive and upbeat and optimistic about the future.
Let's talk about the seeds of all of this,
Yeah.
if you will.
Yeah.
Tough times, tough economic times when you came in. You were looking at a $3.6 billion budget shortfall. Some things had to change. Everybody knows that. But Act 10 comes in February, changing the entire landscape of public workers' collective bargaining. And budget reforms, of course, budget repairs. And of course, there have been criticisms about how that went about, and certainly, again, back to Act 10. One of the criticisms from your opponents has been that you never brought up the notion of Act 10, of changing the rules of the game when it came to collective bargaining during your campaign. And that is the main reason, among others, but the main reason why they are targeting you for
That's certainly the line of the day. You said I would still contend. I think the fact that some of these unions can't get their hands automatically on union dues is the real driving force behind it. But in that case, I remember one of the members on the county board earlier this year in Milwaukee, who had served me, who was not by any means one of my allies, spoke at something, and he said, "Boy, if anybody didn't see this coming, you've been asleep for 8 years." Because for 8 years as the county executive, I talked about the problems with collective bargaining and mediation arbitration in the state. I talked about how it handcuffed local government officials and how it made it difficult, if not impossible, to put in place reasonable reforms that would avoid massive layoffs of public employees and make other changes out there. In fact, I talked about it so much so that combined with, I ran an ad that actually said I was going to ask for 5 and 12% from public employees in terms of pension and health care contribution. Those issues came up so much both during my tenure and during my campaign that AFT Wisconsin, one of those unions that's now protesting me, literally put a flyer out that said, "Don't vote for this guy," to their members. He's going to change collective bargaining. He's going to do the kinds of things we did. So one, it shouldn't be a surprise because I've talked about this for some time. But more importantly, it fits right in with the promises I made. The thing I just mentioned before, the 5 different choices out there. In the state where the largest single piece of the state budget is aid to local government, if I was going to balance a $3.6 billion deficit, I was going to do it without cutting taxes, without laying off employees, without cutting things like Medicaid. The only other area to cut is aid to local governments, schools and local governments. Well, I also said I was going to avoid layoffs at the local level to the extent we could, massive layoffs, and do so in a way that tried to reform things. So having been in local government, having seen it for 8 years, realized that the only way you can make that kind of cut in aid to local government is if in turn you gave every local government in the state equally a chance to control their own destiny and to not just rein in pension health care costs, but to do things like what our schools have overwhelmingly done, bid out their health insurance. Instead of being locked into one company that so many have had to buy from, many of them have saved collectively tens of millions of dollars by bidding that out on the open market. Those are all things that could not have been done had we not passed our reforms, and those are all things fit in concisely with what I talked about during the campaign.
But did you plan Act 10, if you will, during the campaign?
Did I plan the exact bill? No. But I laid out the parameters. Name me an elected official in this state who's run on things and told you every single bill. There's not a governor alive who has laid out every single detail of every single measure they propose. There's not a lawmaker out there who's told you every single bill. What they've told you are, these are the things I believe in, these are the things I stand on, this is what I'll do. The irony of all ironies with what's transpired, particularly of late in the last few months, is most people here in Wisconsin, across America, get upset with politicians who break their promises. I've actually fulfilled my promises, and I've got some people who don't like that. That's fine, it's their right to do that, but it does kind of run contrary to where most people get their outrage. It's usually because somebody does something they said they wouldn't do.
But you were very clear, and as you mentioned, about asking public employees to contribute more.
Like I said, ran an ad on it.
Sure, but when it came to curbing collective bargaining.
Well, I'll tell you why. The simple response for that is we found it abundantly clear, and it was the proof in the pudding is what happened early this year. You cannot do that. You cannot do that across the board unless you change collective bargaining. We had, I remember, I think it was back in March, 2 of the union leaders from 2 statewide unions said, oh, well, we'll do the 5 and the 12 if you don't touch collective bargaining. What happened in the time between when they said that until the time that the bill actually passed? Local union after local union in places like Janesville and elsewhere ran out and locked in contracts that did not have the 5 and the 12. To me, actions speak louder than words. What they were trying to do is get in before that change was made out there. The reality is, if you wanted to have that sort of change, you can't do it statewide. There are 1,700 plus municipalities, 424 school districts, 72 counties. Every one of those contracts has to be negotiated locally. I know it because I saw it for real for a number of county-related unions, and I saw the impact it had when you had collective bargaining in place. If you don't empower, and really this is about respecting the local taxpayers. Local officials, the people that we elect to run our school boards and our city councils, our town boards and our county boards, they're the ones now that get to determine our budgets, not a handful of union leaders who in the past have forced people like me when I was the county executive and the others to make choices we don't want to necessarily have to make under those circumstances. Now, they can be direct stewards of the taxpayers' money and operate the way people want them to.
So what's next? What's Act 2? If Act 10 was a defining bill, yeah, what's next?
I think there's 2 big reforms in the future, and I think in both cases we've done a good job of laying the groundwork that we didn't before for these. One is clearly, without a doubt, having held these listening sessions, hearing from small businesses, we did do more to help get access to more skilled workers, access to more capital for small businesses to grow, and we need to help small businesses cut through the tape of excessive regulations, the red tape that we have at both state and local governments, which will help them grow jobs. Those are all things I think we can work together on, not only across party lines, which I think is very doable, but also state working with local government and government working with the private sector. The other big thing I think is on the horizon we'll start talking about in January and beyond is Dr. Tony Evers and I, the Superintendent of Public Instruction, have been working since really early on this year, have been working on a series of reforms in education. First on a Read to Leave initiative, where we're looking at changing the dynamics so that more of our kids are reading at or above grade level when they come out of elementary school. Looking at educator effectiveness, in particular, looking at an alternative to No Child Left Behind, where we put together a very comprehensive, diverse group of people from around the state to put together a school and school district accountability system that we'll be rolling out early this 2012. And that's one we did a lot of groundwork on together because we have a shared interest. We don't always agree politically, but on these issues we worked well together. And I think not only is it good for education reform, it will also help us when it comes to jobs because a good skilled workforce is one of the strengths we have in Wisconsin.
Sounds like a very, very ambitious agenda
Yeah.
coming up. Let me ask you this point blank. We come back here in 2012, same time. Are we going to be sitting in here talking to Governor Scott Walker, or are we going to be talking to somebody else?
Well, I mean, for me, God willing, and with the blessings of the majority of people in the state of Wisconsin, I hope so. But I don't take that for granted. I feel I need to continuously earn the trust of the people of Wisconsin, not just on the ballot, not just on election day, but every day we're in office. And so my hope is I'll get a chance to earn the trust and ultimately the support of a majority of people here in the state if there is a recall election.
Final question. It involves 2012, certainly.
Yeah.
We have seen a lot of presidential hopefuls over the last several months,
Yeah.
full campaign. Iowa is going to start deciding things in the next week plus. Let me ask you this. Who do you like out of the field right now, from who you see? Who's your candidate?
I've not picked, and with the, excuse me, I've not picked, and with the recall election itself and the focus I need to have here in Wisconsin, I'm probably not going to get involved until we know what's next with the recall, and if there is one, until that's completed. My hope is, looking ahead, much as I'll stay focused on this here, but that there'll be a candidate that steps up and really deals with I think, what is two very divergent views of America, and we saw in many ways true here in Wisconsin as well. There are some people who view success based upon how many more people you can sign up to put on the rolls of government-driven unemployment benefits. And there are others, like myself, who believe that the role of success of government is how many people you get off of unemployment and onto the rolls of private sector paychecks. So it's either payrolls in the private sector or unemployment rolls. My hope is we'll have a candidate at the national level who can articulate a plan that helps put more people on the private sector payrolls, more people back to work in this country, and that'll be good for the state of Wisconsin too.